Now, from potential future Conservative MPs to one of the party's most senior figures, the former leader, Iain Duncan Smith, joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us on the programme today. Now, I've just spoken to Nigel Farage, who says he's open to a pact with the Conservative Party at the next election. Yesterday, Jeremy Corbyn was in your seat announcing his plans to try and scrap universal credit. He clearly thinks he can win in that seat. Would a pact with the Brexit Party help you?
No, I'm not interested in really what other parties say or do. Jeremy Corbyn was distinctly unwelcome in my constituency. Only about 70 people turned up, and he shipped them all in. I've been doing nothing but campaigning in my seat since the 2017 election, and what I do see is a lot of Labour supporters that used to support Labour now moving away from Labour because of the kind of appalling extremism, anti-Semitism of the Labour Party. So I'm not in the slightest bit troubled by what he was doing there. I hope he witnesses that for himself. The reality for us as a party, and I heard your earlier questioning, is to make sure that we recognise there's a distinct difference between being supposedly in the centre ground and then also delivering on what democratically the majority of the public have actually voted for. It's not an extreme position to want to deliver Brexit for those who voted when they were promised that whatever they succeeded in voting for would be delivered. And then there's all the domestic stuff. And I'm absolutely over the moon this morning because I have campaigned for 20 years to get extra money brought into the hospital, my local hospital, to have a rebuild. And finally today, that 400 million has been announced, which is a huge fillip to all the doctors and nurses and people who work in Whipps Cross Hospital. And I'm over the moon that we've finally got a Conservative government, not a Labour government, a Conservative government, investing in the future of Whipps Cross Hospital. I think that's fantastic.
You're talking there about the need to deliver Brexit, to deliver the result of the referendum. We've been speaking on the show quite a lot about the Ben Act, this idea that Parliament's compelled the Prime Minister to seek an extension rather than leave without a deal. Do you think that the Prime Minister should ignore Parliament if a deal can't be secured in time?
Well, it's not really about ignoring Parliament. The question is really, what did Parliament vote for? First of all, this supposed Surrender Act, which people refer to sometimes as the Ben Act, is a mess. It's a complete shambles. It had an amendment made to it. We don't know for certain whether that amendment makes it absolute, that they have to write on the basis of the amendment or on the basis of the original text. There's also the other question, which is really, why does a European Union administration, why would they want to force some kind of extension on a clearly unwilling government that does not want to have that extension? So there's an awful lot of debate and discussion to be had, but Boris Johnson's quite within his rights, absolutely, to say, personal to himself, he will not sign such an act. And I frankly wouldn't do it myself either. And we've gone through a period where really there's a lot of pompous nonsense being taught by people about parliamentary sovereignty. The people are sovereign and they give their sovereign authority to Parliament, who exercise it. But when they've made a decision like they've made, and then they've got MPs and all parties conniving to stop them, that's hardly the centre ground. That is the extreme. And I think of those who are blocking Brexit now as extremists, not centre ground people. The centre ground of British politics is to deliver on what people voted for. And that is what Boris Johnson is determined to do. And no Surrender Act should stop us.
I mean, you're talking about there that it's not the centre ground to, try and stop Brexit from happening. But I guess what some of the people expelled from the party whip would argue is that people have different views on Brexit. That shouldn't mean that they can't be in the broad tent of the Conservative Party. Philip Hammond, for example, telling the Times yesterday that the party is unrecognisable to him. In its place is an ideological puritanism that brooks no dissent. I mean, that's what's happening, is it?
No, it's pompous claptrap. Honestly, all political parties, I've been in now 27 years and I've rebelled against my own government. But there are times when the party says to you categorically, if there are specific issues around how you govern and how you take that forward, this is a vote of confidence. If you choose when it's clear for reasonable reasons, and after all, as one of your earlier guests said, the reason this was a vote of confidence because Parliament was seeking to take the power from government to actually legislate, which is almost completely unprecedented. Therefore, it's quite right that a government says it's a vote of confidence in the government if you vote to strip power from that government. Now, people like the ex-Chancellor and others Oliver Letwin and co., know very well that had they been in any other time, they would have absolutely opposed such a motion. And so the very fact is that they chose to do that was actually to vote against their party's very strong wishes. And so they knew what they were doing. Now, I can remain friends with those individuals. I have much time for many of them, but I simply say to them, you now need to think about how you support your government, because that is the way back. I want to see as many as possible come back into the Conservative Party, but they must start supporting the party and the government. It is not an extreme government. To make stupid statements like that is to play wholly into the hands of a very extreme, anti-Semitic, nasty Labour Party, which many Labour voters, I saw in a poll today, don't want to have in power. So why would they want to play games with that? We need to defeat Jeremy Corbyn and deliver on the British people's vote.
I should probably point out at that point that Jeremy Corbyn and the opposition would clearly refute the suggestion that it's an anti-Semitic party. Just another question for you while we have you. There's been a lot of focus in Parliament this week saying that the language around politics is becoming toxic, that the debate is becoming abusive, that they're receiving death threats. And this, of course, is on all sides, I should say, of every debate. Do you worry that it's now almost dangerous to be an MP? Well,
actually, like anybody else, I've had death threats. I had one too a couple of nights ago after I did an interview on another television network. I'm against all of that. I think any moron who issues death threats to anybody, male or female, and I know that many women feel more at risk of this, they ought to be pursued by the law immediately and dealt with, and it should be made very clear that this is quite unacceptable in any walk of life, by the way, not just for politicians. But it is, in a sense, part to the trade. Now, obviously, clearly, we want to make sure that we moderate the way that we conduct our affairs. I'm quite in favour of that. But I do say that for all the allegations that the Labour Party was making about Boris Johnson, actually, there was a concerted attempt the other night. I was in the chamber, I watched it, concerted attempt to personally attack Boris Johnson in ways that I have not seen prior to this, calling him a cheat, a liar, a fascist. I heard all that screamed across. And many of those who are now moaning, and one or two who actually were later on raising this, they were the worst offenders. And Maria Miller, my colleague and friend, the following day pointed out a couple of women on the Labour benches who she said now moan that this all got out of hand, but they were screaming vile abuse at the Prime Minister through that period. If I had been Speaker, I would, I'm not going to be Speaker, by the way, nor would I want to be, but if I had been, I would have cut that process short. 3.5 hours was too long because far too many people got wound up, and he should have cut it short, I think, and said enough's enough.